サック先生、どうもありがとうございました。大変示唆に富んだ、講義で、私も非常に勉強になりました。皆さん、私のプロフィールにワシントンの CSIS というシンクタンクにいたというのが書いてあると思うんですが、サック先生の口からいつ CSIS という名前が出るかと思って、ほっとしました。ケイトというヘリテージって、この2つとも共和党系の保守系のシンクタンクなものですから、ほっとしたところでありますけれども、いずれにしても今先生の講義の中でいくつかキーワードが出たと思います。アロガンスとリスニングとかですね、コーポレーションとドミナンスとかですね。で今皆さんは日本にもちろんいるわけですから、今、ご承知のように日本の政府はアベノミクスっていうのをやってて、この政府主導の経済成長が皆さん若い人たちの就職にも絶対追い風になるんだと言っているわけですね。でも一方でそのアベノミクスを支えるアベノミクスを期待しているのは企業であって、その企業が今サック先生が言われたようにいろんなところで実は地球社会全体に不利益を起こしているっていう矛盾もはらんでいると。ですから皆さん個人個人のこれからの就職とか人生とかと、世界全体の調和とかハーモニーとかバランスとかってどういうふうに考えているかっていうのはきっとおそらく上智大学にいるだけではなく、この先ずっと人生を生きていく中で、ずっとサステナブルに考えなきゃいけないアジェンダなんだろうというふうに思います。そう申し上げた上で、ここからその白熱討論ということなんですが、第一の質問はですね、散々サック先生が揶揄されました今そのアメリカの大体インテリ系の人はですね、みんなドナルド・トランプの名前を言うとみんな嫌がりますけども、少なくとも彼が今アメリカの大統領であることは間違いなくて、彼が有名なスローガンを言った「Make America First Again」「Great Again」かアメリカファーストアプローチですね。こういったことがだんだん浸透してきて、日本でもなんか都民ファーストとかですね、いろんなファーストが最近出てきますね。昔我々の時はレディーファーストをちゃんとしなきゃいけないって言われたんですが、もうすっかりそんなものは死語になっちゃってます。そういったことをくだらないことを申し上げるのもあれなので、今第一の質問というのは自分の利益、いわゆる国益、ナショナルインタレスト、あるいは個々人皆さんの利益でも結構です。いいんですが、その集合体としての国益ですね。日本で言えば日本の国益、自国の利益を第一に考える、いわゆるそのホニャララファースト主義、ジャパンファーストでもアメリカファーストでもいいです。そういったイデオロギーっていうのは今後もっと世界で広がっていくと思うか、つまり各国がもっともっとセルフィッシュになると思うか、それともいやそんなことはない、人類社会はそんなにバカじゃないと思うか、ということで二者択一の質問を聞いてみたいと思います。自国第一主義が広がるだろうとかなり悲観的に思っている方はどうぞ挙手をしてみてください。半分ぐらいでしょうか。逆にじゃあお伺いします。いやそんなに広がらないと思う方、それほど人類はバカじゃない、捨てたもんじゃないと思う方、はい、ありがとうございます。どうも手を挙げてない方もいると思うんですけど、やっぱりややペシミスティックな方が多いと思うんですが、そう、Dr. Sachs, how could you respond to them?
Well, the truth is that both possibilities are real, and we observe a kind of contagion sometimes, that if you have extreme nationalists, that leads to a kind of contagious phenomenon where they become more and more prevalent, as opposed to a period where you have cooperation, which can also lead to more and more cooperative approach. So I don't think we should ever accept the bad outcome, but you're very realistic to think that it's possible. But a world in which each country thinks that cooperation is not possible, we have to just look after ourselves, will be a very dangerous world indeed. If people lose hope of diplomacy, if people lose sight of the fact that we really need cooperation now more than not, it becomes dangerous. Let me give you some basic examples. In order for us to move to a low-carbon energy system, we have to be able to transmit renewable energy across national borders. So if countries can't cooperate, we can't have a transnational infrastructure. Actually, we need to have food trade. We need to have enough confidence that we can not grow certain things and buy it from others. But if trade breaks down, as some people want even, or provoke, then not only is that very, very dangerous, but it's terrible for the natural environment, because there are places that are not properly fit for food production. If they try to grow food in those places rather than importing it, they will destroy the water resources, destroy the aquifers, destroy the biodiversity. So the point I'm making is that we need a cooperative approach for our well-being, and that's why all of this talk about, well, I don't want to make this into a seminar about Donald Trump, but he told the American people the reason we have trouble is all the rest of the world is unfair to us. This is a kind of grievance politics. It's very dangerous. It's very, very dangerous, because it's easy for people to believe in such an approach, because we are actually, I believe, hardwired by our biology to distrust others that we identify as a different group. This is, I mean, evolutionary psychologists believe that this is part of our evolutionary makeup, that we're very cooperative within our own group, but very distrusting when we say that's the other group. And they attribute that to the whole evolutionary process in which, when we were in the African savanna in evolution, we were competing against different groups. So we learned to be trusting within and distrusting outside. And if you play politics like that, you end up with wars. This is the basic point. And wars, forget it. If we have one more big war, we will never have another seminar again. This is how stupid all of that kind of thinking is. Very dangerous. And so you may be right about the tendency in the world. And all of these strong men, like Trump, they think they're strong men. They're not very strong, but they have this kind of obnoxious approach. Or I could name many others, but I don't want to get everyone here into trouble. If we take that approach, the world will be really dangerous. And that's why, another reason why we should really be promoting the United Nations. It's the one place where everybody talks to each other, even places that don't like each other at all. And that is the art of diplomacy, and it's extraordinarily important because it is the only way to keep peace.
はい、ありがとうございます。2番目、今のそのセルフィッシュなのか、もうちょっとみんなで分け与えるような、世界になるのかっていう関連で少しそれを伸ばして言うと、今日の我々のパートナー JICA ですね。JICA はご存知のように日本の ODA を全部コントロールしている非常に大事な機関です。で JICA があるから、いわゆるそのハーバード大学の僕が仲良くしているジョセフ・ナイ先生が言うソフトパワーというものも、日本のソフトパワーっていうのは非常にやっぱり ODA によって、例えばアフリカとか、アジアとかですね、あるいは昔は中国でもそうだったかもしれません。非常に日本のソフトパワーを強めてる。しかし一方でなかなか財政が厳しくなってるんで ODA を減らすべきだという意見があります。結果的に我々が多くのマンデートを与えた自民党の中にはやっぱりそういうことを減らすべきだと、もっと教育無償化になってろと、これもっともですね。ですが一方でその ODA を減らすべきだということを言ってくる人がいると、ますます日本のソフトパワーっていうか世界での存在感がなくなっちゃうかもしれない。これはつまりさっき言ったセルフィッシュなのか、もっと世のため人のためにお金を使うのかっていうことに我々の非常に身につまされる思いなんですが、そこで皆さんにお聞きします。その政府開発援助 ODA、これから日本はもっと 増額、特に若い人たちですね、増額すべきだと、あるいは少なくとも維持すべきだと思うか、それとも、自民党のおじさんたちが言うようにですね、この際もう減らしましょうと、そんな人のこと構ってられませんよという、北朝鮮もミサイルぶっ放してさみたいなですね、そういうふうに思ってるかどうか、ちょっとお聞きしたいと思います。手でまたお願いします。ODA 増やすべきか現状維持すべきだと思う方、どうぞ。はい、ありがとうございます。じゃあ逆にあえて聞きます。減らした方がいいんじゃないのと思う人どうですか。はい、ありがとうございます。So, can I have your comment?
Yeah. So, development aid is a very important part of a civilized world. There's not a lot of it compared to the size of economies. And sometimes some economists therefore say, therefore it doesn't matter because it's not very big compared to the market forces or compared to the amounts of movements of private investment. But ODA, official development aid, is very, very important for the poor countries, especially the poorest countries, because without it, these countries can get trapped in extreme poverty. How much aid is given? Well, the idea established 47 years ago in 1970 was that each of the rich countries should give 1% of its income to poor countries. And of that 1%, 70% of the 1% should come from governments, and 30% of the 1% should come from civil society, from private people, from foundations, from philanthropists. So the idea was that government should give 0.7 of 1%. Now, my argument has been that's not a lot for our societies. By definition, it's less than 1%. And if we can't manage even 1% of our income for the poorest people in the world, we're not being very moral. People have argued, well, Professor Sachs, you're wrong because aid doesn't work. And there are opponents of aid that say many things. First, they say, oh, it's all stolen. Second, it's very demeaning. If you give money to somebody, you are humiliating them. There are people who say if you give money to a bad government, you are empowering the bad government, so you're making matters worse because you're strengthening a dictator, for example. So these are and then there are people who say, oh, it doesn't matter. If you work hard, you can have anything you want. So you don't really need aid. You shouldn't be dependent anyway. So these are the kind of criticisms that are made. I wrote a book 12 years ago called The End of Poverty, where I argued against these points of view. And I think the arguments are still valid, in that people need this to stay alive. It's possible to give aid in a scientific manner. It's possible to track the aid. And it's also possible to give aid in a way that empowers people who might otherwise die without it. And Ambassador Kitaoka mentioned one kind of aid, for example, which I found to be very powerful, and that is aid for public health. And Japan will host an important meeting on universal health coverage, which is SDG number 3. Of course, you all know that. Next week, or in a couple of weeks. I helped to develop an idea 15 years ago called the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. And it has helped to save millions of lives at very, very low cost. And some of my economist friends who were very against this then studied a few years ago, why did it work? We thought all the money would be stolen. And they couldn't quite figure it out. And then they went and they interviewed people and they found the bed nets actually got to where they were supposed to get to, and they were very puzzled because in economic theory, people are supposed to just be selfish. And then they came up with the big insight that maybe the health workers weren't just selfish, but they were actually trying to promote public health. Well, it takes an economist to have that kind of blindness, that you wouldn't know that people aren't necessarily selfish and would be proud of their profession and would be able to carry it out honestly. But I'm arguing now for more global funds. I would like a global fund for education because SDG 3 says that every boy and girl in the world should be able to get at least a secondary school education. But in the poorest countries, those governments cannot afford to build enough secondary schools. They can't afford to train enough teachers. They can't afford to provide the resources to guarantee universal secondary education. So I say the rich countries should guarantee what the poor countries can't afford. And I've been trying to make this argument for several years, so far not successful. And one good point in economic development is to be very stubborn. Don't give up, because sometimes it can take many years. It took us 7 years to convince the world to give away the bed nets. But it finally happened, and then malaria deaths came way down. So I still believe we should have special funding for education. Now, when I go around to governments, I'm told, well, there's no money in our budgets for that, Mr. Sachs. When I spoke to Mr. Bill Gates last week, he said, no, you know, if we give more for this, it's going to be less for something else because there's no more money. But there is more money. There really is. How much aid are we really giving? In Japan, I don't know the current number, maybe 0.2 of 1%. In the United States, 0.16 of 1%. Less than a fourth of what we're supposed to give. Where does all our money go? To the Koch brothers. We cut their taxes. These greedy men. Greedy. Because they should say with their $100 billion, we don't need this, we give this for education for poor kids. They don't do that. And so we need to tax them and then use the money to make sure that poor children can get an education. What do they need $100 billion for? Nobody in this world needs $100 billion. Nobody. And we should not let that happen. It's bad for society to have people who are so rich as that. And so this is really the point, that we should take this seriously. And when you go to work in a very poor country, you'll see how much difference a little bit of money can make to survival, to clean water, to raising children, to keeping them in school. Almost nothing can go so far. And that's why we should be very attentive to this idea. Thank you for being strong majority.
サック先生、非常にご満悦の様子で、昔さっきソフトパワーと ODA の関係性を話しましたけど、昔は例えばインドネシアのスハルト大統領とかフィリピンのマルコス大統領とかいて、開発独裁って言葉がありました。今はすっかりもちろんそんな概念は消え失せてですね、おそらく北岡先生、JICA の皆さんをはじめとしてこれからやっぱり ODA の質を考えなきゃいけないと。単に箱物ですね、いわゆる橋とかビルとか建てるんじゃなくて質的な向上を目指さなきゃいけない。でその中で今サック先生がいただいた教育、例えばグローバルな教育基金の創設なんていうのはとてもいいアイデアだと思うんですね。でなぜかというと教育レベルが上がれば民主的な話し合いをしようという人が増えるでしょうし、それが結果的に民主主義が必ずしもベストとは言いませんが、 チャーチルイギリス首相のように民主主義が世界に広まればより紛争のない平和な社会につながっていくってことにもなるでしょうし、フェアネスって観点で考えてもグローバリゼーションの恩恵をあまねく世界に広げるためには、例えばそういう教育をみんなでサポートするっていうのは非常にサステナブルな考え方ではないかと今先生が話をされているのを聞いて思いました。皆さん特に若い世代の人たちから見て、いわゆるグローバリゼーションというものは今の日本で生きる自分にとってメリットがあるか、その利益を受けているかどうかという質問をしたいと思います。そこに関してですね、グローバリゼーションは結局やっぱり今の自分の生活なり人生を豊かにしていると思う人は手を挙げてみてください。どうぞ。はい、ありがとうございます。6割ぐらい、60%。じゃあ逆にグローバリゼーションでむしろ、心とかいろんな面を含めてですね、むしろそんなに豊かになんなく逆になってるんじゃないかっていう問題意識を持ってる人どのくらいいますか。はい、ありがとうございます。カフートでも出てますかね。今やってる188、あと30秒だそうです。さあ急いでください。締め切りますよ。じゃあ200になったら締め切りましょう。はい、締め切ります。大体今のお手手を挙げていただいたのと同じですね。だからグローバリゼーションは基本的にいいことだっていうふうにみんな思っているんだと思うんですが、さてサックス先生はグローバリゼーションについてはどういうふうに今お考えなんでしょうか。ぜひ皆さんとお話をしてください。
This morning, we started the day with a wonderful breakfast and a good cup of coffee. Well, coffee is globalization. That was not Japanese-grown coffee. I'm sure that it came, I don't know where, maybe it came from Vietnam, maybe it came from Brazil, maybe it came from Colombia, maybe it came from Ethiopia, but it did not come from Japan. And I basically would have a hard time living without my coffee. So if we didn't have globalization, I would be very sad. And this is true in general, that trade enables us to have better lives, to enjoy products, ideas, culture that we would not find in our closed society, to be richer. What's also true, however, is that globalization has many complex effects in society. We can't do without it, but we should also understand that the interconnections of trade and finance lead to complicated realities in society. When China joined the world economy in 1978, when Deng Xiaoping came to power, and China followed a model like Japan's development, as I explained earlier, and it began to become part of the international trading system and had export-led growth. Well, first of all, this benefited China incredibly, but it also benefited those of us, for example, I like my iPhone. It was made in China, and it was made at low cost in China, at lower cost than if I bought it in the United States, so that was good as a consumer. But it was also true that workers in the United States that might have made this or other products lost their jobs when the trade went to China or the factories went to China. So when you study international trade and financial theory, you find out that in general there are benefits of trade, but there are also losers from trade. So trade raises the overall economy, but it also shifts the distribution of income. This is the basic conclusion of international trade. Now, there are two approaches to that. One is to say, I don't want the income distribution shifted, so we're going to close the borders. And countries that do that end up losing very badly because they lose all the benefits of trade. Also, they don't learn about the technologies of other countries. So they fall behind technologically. The other approach is to say, because the income distribution changed, we should redistribute income within our country from those who won to those who lost so that everybody can be made better off. So the idea is you combine trade with income redistribution. This, I believe, is the right approach. But in the United States, we do not do this because the US, as I explained, became a kind of corrupt political system. So the rich say, why should we help anybody else? We're rich, therefore we're better. And nobody else deserves anything. And people in my country read a very bad novelist named Ayn Rand, who wrote terrible books. And she is called a philosopher in America. But she's not a philosopher, she's just a bad novelist. We just label things badly. They also call McDonald's food in my country, and so on. So she's not a philosopher. She's a bad novelist, but she said rich people should just be left alone because they're great people, and poor people shouldn't bother them. They're just takers. They're not makers. This is the crazy ideas that we have. So all of this means you need trade with fairness of the income distribution. People who are hurt should help to get new skills, or they should not pay taxes or get rebates so that their income take-home pay is high enough. Every country should have free health care paid for by the general budget, not by the out-of-pocket expenses. Countries should have education available to all, even people who can't afford it. And then trade is beneficial for everybody because you share the benefits of trade. Now, what Donald Trump said is trade is bad, it hurt you, and I'm going to have a trade war. Well, he's a kind of idiot, I'm sorry to say. Honestly. And he knows nothing about trade, and he thinks the bilateral trade balance, which is, it's just so wrong, all his ideas, because they're very simple ideas. He's a businessman who put his name on buildings. He never studied any of this. But he convinced people that you're worse off because China made evil things to you, or the Mexicans made evil things to you, and so forth. So this is the very dangerous idea. And we're just hoping he will move on soon. And we can keep our open trading system and also get back to domestic redistribution of income so that rich people transfer money to poor people, not poor people transferring money to rich people.
はい、ありがとうございます。通常私もアメリカに長くいてサックス先生のようないわゆるインテレクチャルな人とたくさん出会うんですけども、めったにサックス先生のような方がイディオットって言葉を使うのは聞いたことがなくてですね、それほどやっぱりトランプ政権に対してですね非常に深い愛情を持ってらっしゃるんだなとよく感じました。だんだん時間が押してきたのでですね、もうここからは学生諸君の質問をぜひ取ってみたいと思います。手短によく英語で言うんですけども Don't tell your statement but you ask your question だから短い本当の質問をしてください。それでサックス先生の方から Dr. Sachs, would you please pick up those raising hands?It's your stage.
Yep.
So,
I should pick.
with your
Okay.
response.
Please.
じゃあまず最初彼女マイクは、はい所属とお名前をもしできたら言ってください。
慶応義塾大学研究員の落合と申します。Thank you for your wonderful presentation, and I'm interested in the process of developing SDGs because I'm working on Japan's SDGs right now, and it's really difficult. So, who do you think should take initiative to develop countries' own SDGs?
Great. Thank you very much. By the way, I should have said Donald Trump's views of trade theory are based on empirically questionable academic research that is not fully subscribed to in the technical literature, raising questions that should be asked about his trade views. That's what I meant to say, but I used a short word. I apologize.
I know that.
Could I get my slide back possibly? Because then I will show you about Japan and the SDGs. We make every year in the project that I lead for the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, I was going to show you this, but I talked instead. Okay. So we make every year for 160 countries an index of how the countries stand on the Sustainable Development Goals. And Japan, I was in the right place, but then I hit a wrong button. Hold on. Overall, Japan ranked 11th out of 157 countries. That's pretty good. Japan is a rich, prosperous country. Japan's inequality of income is not so high. Japan has always had a relatively narrow gap between rich and poor, compared to the United States, for example. Japan has the longest life expectancy in the world. You should be very proud of that. Very healthy people, very healthy, wonderful diet, and a very good healthcare system. And so Japan has many, many strengths. But we also try to understand what are the limitations, where are the problems. And we identified in relative terms what we call the dashboard, which is the color scheme below. And if it's red, it means that's where some serious problems should be examined. If it's green, it means perfect. And if it's yellow, it means that there's usually one or two indicators that could be raised. And this can be found online. It's called the SDG Index and Dashboards, and you can find it online. Now, what are the problems in Japan? One is gender equality, because the pay of women is not as high, the labor force participation not as high, the proportion of women in the diet not so high, and so it shows up lower than many other countries. SDG 12 and 13 is environmental management. And here you have to look at the specific indexes, but I'll refer to SDG 13, which is about climate change. Japan emits a lot of carbon dioxide per person. And all of the high-income countries need to reduce the carbon dioxide. By how much? Well, what the science tells us is if we want to achieve the goals we set in Paris, we have to reach 0 emissions of carbon dioxide by 2050. In other words, the rich countries have to, in fact, all countries have to decarbonize the energy system. This is very hard. How is Japan going to do that? What energy sources? Will it be large-scale nuclear power again? This country's grappling with that. I believe that nuclear energy will be needed in Japan, but after Fukushima, all of the risks, people want to be satisfied this is safe, that the systems are working properly, that the backups are working properly. And so this is a big question. You don't have as much sunshine as many places to say, well, it's just solar energy, or enough land, because you need a lot of land for solar energy. What about hydropower? Well, you have that in Hokkaido. You have some more potential. but maybe long-distance transmission of renewable energy from other places, from the Gobi Desert. There are plans that are being discussed for very long-distance transmission of renewable energy around the world. There's a project I'm going to be in Beijing to talk to the organizer of the project of a global interconnection system. This is a very smart idea, I believe. Of course, we need a lot of trust because a country that's the receiver has to believe that it's not going to be cut off. And so national security is a real question. But in any event, SDG 13 is a challenge. SDG 15 about terrestrial ecosystems shows up because Japan imports a lot of goods from places that are in environmental stress. And so part of our index not only measures the direct effects on the environment, but also the imports, because when we import goods from Indonesia or from other places that are in environmental crisis, we need to have the responsibility as importers that the value chain is sustainable. This is a level of awareness that's not high enough right now in the world. But to answer your question, I would start with the goals and then I would analyze Japan's strengths and weaknesses and ask, where does Japan fall short in sustainable development? What are the priorities? And then try to identify the areas that fit Japan's needs and challenges. But nobody gets to escape from the responsibility of climate change because this is a global challenge, it's urgent, and we all need to do it, no matter what my president says. We all need to do it, and we are going to do it. I even predict, it's a little bit risky, but I predict the US will not leave the Paris Climate Agreement like Donald Trump says, because he says a lot of things that aren't real. And the treaty has a 4-year announcement time. By the time we get to 2020, he will have forgotten that he said it in 2017. So I don't believe we're ever going to leave the Paris Agreement because all other 192 countries are staying in it. And I think the United States will stay in it too.
Thank you. Since we have only 10 minutes left, and let me speak in English. And it's very much hard to be fair in this kind of situation, but to be fair, think about diversity. And you have 2 more questions, okay?
Yeah.
Again, please say your short question, and please answer shortly, please, okay? And it's your, okay.
Thank you, Professor Sachs, for the interesting lecture. I'm Karthik, and I'm a doctoral student at the University of Tokyo. And my question comes to deal with the free market fundamentalists, as in, to achieve all the SDGs, we need several trillions of dollars in funding every year, and that's only possible if we convince the free market financial institutions to work with aid agencies. So how do we try and incentivize them to be focused more on sustainability?
Great. So we need a market economy. A fully planned economy does not work. It was tried for 75 years in the Soviet Union. It failed badly. We need a mixed economy that has role of government and role of the marketplace. But we also need a regulated economy. And the regulations need to steer the direction of the private capital. I think we should regulate, for example, in automobiles, not just say, well, we need to add an incentive to buy an electric vehicle. No, we know from the carbon dioxide emissions that we need to move to zero-emission vehicles. And I believe we should tell the auto industry that as of the year 2030, only zero-emission vehicles can be sold from then on. China is doing that, by the way. China's basically saying, you have to go to electric. And they're going to be the biggest automobile market in the world. I think they will push everybody in that direction in any event. Then capital markets will go because it will be profitable to invest in Tesla, or it will be profitable to invest in other zero-carbon vehicles. So this question of mobilizing resources is a very deep one. for certain kinds of resources like health and education, this should basically be through tax revenues. And for income redistribution, this should be through tax revenues, tax rich people and help poor people. This is very basic and very important to do. For other kinds of investments for industry, basically we should regulate so that the unsustainable kind of production is just not allowed, it's phased out. We did this, remember that the chlorofluorocarbons, the CFCs that used to be in the refrigerators, were destroying the ozone level. We didn't say, how do we convince the private markets not to use so many CFCs? We said in the Montreal Protocol, it is illegal and it's being phased out. Get it out. We said of lead in gasoline, get it out. And so strong governments are needed to say to businesses, you cannot behave damaging the health of people. But our government, as I said, in the United States is a very weak government because the lobbyists run in and they pay and they tell the congressmen. So we get the idea, oh, we have to bribe them not to hurt other people. No, we should tell them, I want to tell the Koch brothers, you're going out of business. And to ExxonMobil, in 2050, either you're a wind company or you're nothing. We really need to tell them that. But for that, we need a strong enough government that says this is the direction we're going because we need it, and investors that invest in a different direction are going to lose all their money. And then it becomes profitable to invest in sustainable development. Similarly, we need governments that say, you cannot plant palm oil beyond this line. You cannot cut down tropical hardwoods in this forest. If we can't draw these lines, we cannot succeed. That's the basic point. And the more I've seen it, what I came to understand is the reason the free market libertarians are so wrong is that we need these rules, but what they create is a very weak state and very powerful private sector. And then the private sector is so powerful that the government can't do its job. And that's what happened in the United States. We lost control of the government. It became privatized. Even the prisons are privatized in the United States. And then they lobby, literally, they lobby to say to their state governments, you have to lock up more people to keep our prisons fully occupied. You can't even make this up. It sounds like a fiction novel, but it's not, it's real. So we lost control of our government by privatizing it too much.
はい、ありがとうございます。Thank you so much. 非常に、名残惜しいんですが申し訳ありません。他に質問たくさんあったんですが、時間の関係で、そろそろ終わりを、迎えなければなりません。最後に私から短く、今日のテーマ SDG ですけども、どんな大きな大河ですね、川も、始まりはおそらく小さな水の一滴だと思います。ですから今日特に学生の皆さん、今日ここに来た思いを忘れずにこれからも勉強に人生に頑張ってもらいたいと思います。それがきっと君たち自身の SDG になるのではないかというふうに思います。で最後にですね、サックス先生にちょっともう時間が切れになったので特別なお願いしたいと思います。Dr. Sachs, since we are running out of our time, would you please make a promise with them that you should come back here again, make another lecture at Sophia University? Are you sure? Could you do that?
If you will have me, I'll come back, for sure.
いただきましたので、またぜひまた皆さんご参加ください。どうも盛大な拍手をサックス先生にもう一回お願いします。